All right, here we go. So thank you everyone for joining us for this session on career building for emerging photographers. Really excited because we have four incredible photographers with us today, and then there's me. My name is Connor Risch. I am a member of the Photo Plus staff, and I'm also the editor of the 30, which for those who aren't aware is an annual program that celebrates the work of early career photographers. So this is a pretty exciting day for us because we just announced the 2020 edition of the 30 this morning. And you can read all about the 30 photographers that were selected and check out their work at the30photographers.com. And you can follow along on Instagram to kind of keep up on what's going on at the 30 photographers. So I want to just take a quick moment to introduce the speakers. I'm going to skip any sort of lengthy introductions and really just get right into it because you're going to learn about these folks as we go along and they talk through some of their work. So I've asked each photographer to share images that represent important points in their careers and to share the backstory about how they kind of created the opportunities that led to these photographs. One of the reasons I'm excited about this, and I think this format is kind of cool, is because I think when we're looking at image, we tend to look at images and then we kind of move on to the next one. I think one of the great things about being able to speak with photographers about their careers is that you start to understand how much each image can be seen as a representation of a lot of hard work that goes on behind the scenes that you don't get to see. So I hope that everyone enjoys listening to some of the stories behind the images. We are definitely going to take some questions because I'm sure everybody has questions. We feel free to put them in the chat now. We probably will not get to them until the end, however. Yeah, I think with that, we're going to get started. We're going to run these in alphabetical order. So we're going to start with Miran.
Cool. How's it going, everyone who's out there?
Maybe tell everyone where you're at and where you're from.
Yeah. My name is Moran, photographer, mostly based in Seattle, in New York a lot, but like most, I'm here. I'm in Seattle now. This is where I'm at. Yeah, do mostly portraiture and journalism work. Celebrity portraiture, but also a lot of kind of reportage work as well.
Cool. All right, we'll get to this first one.
Yeah, so the reason I started with this image is it was kind of one of the first kind of big stories. And by big, I just mean kind of expanding on an idea rather than kind of like a singular portrait of a celebrity or a subject in general. I was asked to photograph a day at the Daily Show with Trevor Noah. And so it was kind of a whole day from that first morning meeting where they talk over kind of the daily, the actual news of the day. And then, they essentially construct the episode by the end of it. I think that the reason that this image is really important for this kind of idea of this panel was because I think early on in my career, something that was really important was to get my foot in the door was showing kind of bodies of work rather than individual images. Because I think that early on in your career, you're not necessarily going to have like huge celebrities in your book or like these amazing, like one image kind of tells a whole kind of thing. So I think early on, I really just kind of started expanding on personal work and things that kind of showed, if you give me kind of time to flush out a narrative, I can visually do that. And that kind of shift in portfolio meetings, or at least how I thought at portfolio meetings, led to kind of this opportunity to shoot this story for Vice, which went on. We ended up winning an American Photography Award for this story, or this image particularly. So this was definitely kind of a first big story, because I think off the momentum of that, I was able to kind of show people like, hey, if you give me a chance, I can show a full story, like, rather than trying to compete with, as a 22-year-old competing with people who have 10 years of celebrity portraiture, in their book.
That's great. Yeah, that's a good point of differentiation. And so up until that point, had you been showing mostly, had you been trying to put series like that, sort of narratives into the portfolio that you were showing to the editors that you were reaching out to?
I think early on, which a lot of us, I'm sure a lot of the photographers on this panel can agree with, I think early on, you kind of really lean into the idea of like, I need to show my best and my range. Like I can, show that I can do a lot well. which I think is such a funny thing we do early on, and at least for me. And I think that I naturally did like within my personal work, did more narrative based stories, but I felt like I was supposed to be showing kind of individual, like, that image is good. Like, look what I can do here. Look what I can do there. And I think once I kind of just committed to showing a couple strong stories, I think it made conversations go better with editors and kind of just showed I could flesh out an idea more than like kind of individual shots.
Yeah. Okay.
That helped me a lot.
Great. All right, we'll move on to this next one.
And so I think that, I did a story on Atlanta United's academy program. This was a pitch. I pitched this to ESPN Undefeated. And this was interesting because I think that at a certain point with editorial, I found myself kind of competing with personal work, like in terms of time usage. Like I was kind of getting to this point where I felt like I wasn't able to do the stuff I want to do for me because I was busy, or like vice versa. I was doing all this personal work, but I felt like I wasn't paying attention to the professional side enough. So I kind of kept competing internally. So I kind of entered the idea of like pitching and like kind of combining these interests. And Atlanta United now, but at the time specifically, like I think was just new strong club of soccer club in Atlanta that had a really diverse group of players, which I think is not that common in the US regionally, like in terms of the player pool. So I pitched that up to ESPN, and they sent me down there and let me photograph it for, I think it was 4 days or 3 days. And yeah, I think that this was an important story for me to learn, like expressing to editors like my exact interests, and like there's room for your personal interests to kind of feed into stories that you can flush out with them. So I think this was kind of a really not turning point, but just important for me to understand it's okay to start incorporating these kind of personal projects that I've been trying to fund and do on my own into the editorial commercial world as well now. It's starting to happen more often.
Had you worked on assignment for the Undefeated prior to pitching this to them, or was this a way kind of in the door at that place?
Yeah, it was actually a way in the door. The editor I worked with at the time there, we knew of each other. We hadn't necessarily worked with each other professionally, but she was a photographer as well, so I was a fan of her work and we knew each other's work. But it was my first time pitching into them, and kind of just took the long shot and just was like, well, if you're interested, I have this idea I think is really strong, and they had a writer there that got really interested in it, and it kind of just came together.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Try this next one.
And so I think that for this image, so this is Nipsey Hussle, and he recently passed away about 1.5 years ago. But it was a really important image to me because I think that part of what I do in terms of celebrity portraiture is I call it the anti-mood board. So I try to Google people and click the image tab, and then just like, that's not what I want to do. I'm just like, okay, well, that's how they're already thought about. And I think with him, he kind of never really had a quiet moment and photographed that way at the time. And so it was something that was really important to me, kind of express and make this kind of image that stood alone of him in strong and quieter. Because I think a lot of times, it's mostly performance images, to be honest, of him at the time. And so that was really important to me. And I think the reason I included this image is because I think kind of figuring out that process for me of how to really think about the pre-pro into it, particularly a celebrity shoot, and creatively, not necessarily just like logistically, like aesthetically, creatively, how do I want to express somebody? And I thought this image is really important it's already important to me just because of his story, but process wise, I thought it was really important to share.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. It's a really interesting strategy to, but do you, so then if you're looking at other images that have already been made, and then trying to make something that looks different, does the tone of the imagery that you make, especially the celebrity portraiture, change a lot? Like this is kind of a quieter one. Will you go in the other direction, or are you pretty consistent with what you're trying to achieve when you're working with somebody?
I think, I'll be honest, I think a lot of that has to do with my personal investment into that celebrity, right? Like how much I know about them and their narrative. I just think that like, I don't like forcing a visual cue on somebody. So if they walk into the room, they have a certain tone to them that day, even not even necessarily like what they're like. I think it's important to embrace kind of how someone's feeling that day. But I just think that like it's so easy to think about branding right now, especially with the internet and everything and the way it works, that it's important to me at least attempt to creatively think about the long-term visual narrative of that person. We're talking about celebrity particularly.
Yeah.
Um, and I just think it's nice to be able to kind of create something that might seem against the grain, if possible, of like how I've seen them, but not necessarily like as literal as if they're laughing, get them sad. I just mean, it can be even the color. It can come down to that for me. Just kind of something where I feel it kind of challenges the way we've seen them. I try my best to do.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's move on to the next.
And this is the choir that performs with the Pierre Moss fashion show every year. I don't really do much fashion week work, but I was assigned and I got an assignment to photograph theirs one year or a couple years ago, and I was really interested in his choir, and so I photographed them as lot as well as the clothes, right? Like that was for work, and then I was really fascinated by the choir, and it was amazing. And so at the end of that job, I had this really beautiful film photo I made of them performing that I sent to the owner of Pierre Moss, and they brought me back a year later to just photograph just the choir for internally, like for the brand. And I just thought this was a good image to show of kind of like, it's really important to interject yourself into your assignment, and I think that expanding, if you can, like, it's not always going to be like right down your alley or stuff you're super, like passionate or know a lot about. But I just think it's really important to kind of interject ourselves into our projects if we can and pull out what interests us, because I think it can expand into other possibilities. And I thought this was a really good opportunity because a lot of the work I made for the brand a year later was actually like the images that were so important to me, kind of from working within that fashion week experience.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a good lesson too. It must be sometimes hard to carve out the time when you're on assignment to maybe make some photos that are just for you. But it seems like it's a good opportunity if you have the time to be able to get some stuff for your book that may look a little bit more like what you would be shooting if you were just there for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, let's be honest, it's always going to be the time factor, right? That's always usually what it comes down to. But yeah, just I think that something that will always kind of keep me creatively going too, instead of every time I get put into a space, is kind of thinking about what I want to see it there, whether that's on par with what we're supposed to be doing or not. It's like, it just keeps me kind of passionate.
Mm-hmm. All right. What about Jeff here?
So this is honestly the reason I ended on this was because it was a situation where I think I'm sure every photographer here understands kind of making it up on the fly and trying to think about kind of how to do something you care about without much kind of opportunity to plan. So I was supposed to photograph him in an environment, and then like it was just a situation where I happened to have this black backdrop and we were supposed to wear something out. It just kind of worked out where I saw the opportunity for kind of a monochromatic portrait, and I just had to take that gut instinct and just make that photo instead of kind of what we had initially planned. Because I feel like an editorial, particularly, and celebrity portraiture, a lot of times people think when they see that final photo, it's exactly how you planned it to go, whereas a lot of times that can be just the total opposite. So I always appreciate this portrait because he was really fair and like winging it with me. And I think that when people see your confidence in kind of like the approach, right, is like, hey, that's not going to work. Can we just do this? And I think this is going to work really well. And they just see it in your tone. It can help a lot. And I just thought that was like, we're talking about like career photography. I think that's like an important note to end on.
Yeah, definitely. How long did it, was that something you are just naturally inclined to be kind of confident? Because I think there are people that can just do that and don't really get that starstruck, or was that something you had to work on?
I think that I don't think I never really get starstruck really, but I do think what took me a while to learn is because most of the times when you're working in certain portrait environments, it's not necessarily always celebrity, just in general, people don't have much time. And I think something I know it took me a long time to really kind of be firm about is that if you need them to do something, you need to say it confidently, because it's like if you leave that gray area and someone only gives you 5 minutes, they're gonna think you're wasting 2 minutes to like figure it out. So I think this was a good example of, learning that and just knowing I need to just commit to this idea, even though I didn't walk into the room thinking I was going to do that day.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's like the confidence of just stating your idea. And usually, you want it to be good, and you're going to commit you committed, it's happening. So it's like, let's do it.
For sure. There's a question here from Felinda Roy, and I just wanted to take it because I think it's relevant to your first slide. And she was just curious what you did to get that day in the life shoot for Vice of The Daily Show.
I mean, I met with the photo editor maybe a month prior. I think that it wasn't necessarily, I mean, I don't know if there's any specific thing. I do think I showed kind of like more reportage work that I think just fit into the idea when they got the opportunity to write that story. And yeah, I mean, I think it was just an opportunity of seeing my work and knowing that I could kind of flush out a story given time somewhere.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much, Marin.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're going to move on, still moving in alphabetical order. We're going to move on to Rosette. Hi, Rosette.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, do you want to just tell everyone where you are, where you're from?
Yeah, I'm Rosette Rago. I live in Los Angeles. I'm here. I'm mostly editorial photographer as well, mostly portraits, some documentary and reportage in my personal work. Yeah.
Cool. All right, we'll get right into these then.
Cool. So I picked this as my first photo because it was kind of the transition, what helped me transition in my career. At this point, I'd already been shooting music photography for a couple of years, which is where I started. And my first time shooting U2 is really what opened the door for me to get to the next level, so to speak. It was the first time I'd gotten paid like real money for my work, and it gave me, I think the most important part of it was it gave me the confidence to like start reaching out to like possible editors and clients that I was too afraid to approach before that, because I felt like the photos from this shoot ended up like on HBO. It ended up on their DVD and Blu-ray packages, their posters, and in the end it was on a Smithsonian book about rock and roll photography. And I was like, I felt so good about the opportunity that I felt legitimate enough to start talking to people to ask them to hire me for stuff.
That's great. Did you, so how did all of that come to pass? Did you, once you had the photos, did you reach out to try and, license them places, or did they find you?
No, so this was shot for a local LA magazine, and you know how after they publish these things, they send them back to the publicist, and publicist contacted me and said, hey, I'm connecting you with U2's team because they want to possibly use these photos for like the DVD they're planning on. So that's kind of, it just went from there, and it was just like the easiest working experience ever.
That's crazy. Cool story though. All right, so how about this one?
So Jolie Rubin from the New York Times called me for this Crazy Rich Asians shoot, and I very, very excitedly accepted it with a lot of anxiety, knowing I had never photographed that many people before in one room. But, I enjoy being put in high stress situations like this because it does force me to reconsider my process and like how I usually deal with these portrait shoots. So what I did was I invited like 5 friends to come to my house the night before, and I tested like the positioning that I was envisioning for this shoot, just to like make sure that by the time the shoot came, I wouldn't look like such an amateur trying to like figure it out on the spot. But yeah, it was really like one of those shoots where you just learn so much from it, like especially learning how to yell in a room where there's like so many people, because with celebrity shoots, each person comes with like their own teams, and we were in a tiny hotel room. There were like more than 20 of us in one tiny room. So, high caliber folks tend to just have people talking to you all at the same time. So you kind of learn, it's a crash course in just like asserting your authority, sort of, while still trying to be like a nice, pleasant person to work with.
That's great. When Jolie called you about this, I mean, did she have a sense, or are you able to be honest with the editor and say, I want to do this, but I, maybe haven't been in this position before? Or like, how do you make that step if it's maybe not something you've done before?
So I've worked with her a bunch, and she knew, like she has sent me to a lot of portrait shoots before that where it's like 1 or 2 people, but this was, I think she was familiar with my work, where she knew that I had never photographed this many people before. But it kind of also says something about how much she trusted me, which is like the most daunting part about it all, really, is like just worried about disappointing this editor who trusted you so much with this amazing assignment. So we planned, like I basically consulted with her with like the backdrop that I wanted and like sort of what I was thinking for the setup, but for the most part she just like let me do my thing. That's
great. This must have been tough.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of photo shoots where I show up and I'm just like so nervous and scared all the time. But this assignment, my editor for this was Christy Harmon, also from the New York Times, and I was a last minute replacement. She called me at like 7 a.m. The photographer who was supposed to shoot her backed out last minute. So she was like, it's 8 a.m. I need you at this shoot at 3 p.m. today. Oh, by the way, it's Annie Leibovitz. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. Very, very nervous, very scared. I like to think that Annie sensed the respect I had for her because we got on so well. We ended up spending like 2 hours together. It was supposed to be like a 15-30 minute shoot, but she was so nice to us. I think it was also because I looked so young, and I did look a little scared of her. But this was like an important exhibit for her, so she toured me around her exhibit. We really got a chance to kind of just get comfortable with each other, and we did so many setups. Like she must have let me do 5 different setups for this day, and at the end of it, she was asking me if I still needed some more. It was just like unbelievably generous of her, and still one of my favorite memories from a photo shoot.
Great. It's beautiful. Yeah, this is an interesting photo too.
Yeah, getting called to shoot Kanye West's Sunday service, it was special because it felt like kind of going back to my roots in music photography. Like there were so many elements about this show that excited me, the hill that they made just for this show, knowing that I wouldn't have to worry about indoor concert lighting because it was outside in the sun, and the uncertainty of my access, like it wasn't completely entirely sure just how close I would be able to get until I got there. And in the end, I was pretty much allowed to run around wherever except for the actual hill he was on. And despite what I think about the artist himself, like I really, really love the photos from this shoot.
Yeah, they're certainly interesting. And who was this for?
This was for the New York Times too.
Oh, okay. That's great. You seem to work quite a bit for the New York Times. Can you just quickly talk about how you started to get in touch with editors there?
Yeah, my first shoot with them was, I think, in 2014. I basically cold emailed 2 editors there at the culture and arts section because my portfolio was mainly music and musicians. And Alana Selly, who was at Culture at the time, she basically was like, well, let me know when you're in New York and show me your book. And I'd never met an editor or anyone in real life before for work. So I quickly, I had no idea what she meant by a book. So I made like a literal book with like a hardcover book of my photos. And then I booked a last minute flight to New York and I said, hey, I'm here, let's meet up. and did that meeting. And when I got back to LA, she hired me for a concert, which that was my very first shoot with that for the Times, was shooting Chris Stapleton. And it was honestly like one of the worst photos I've ever turned over to any publication. And it was like, there was no lighting. It was in a really dark venue, and I was so embarrassed to turn them in. And I thought I would never get hired by the Times again. And then I somehow miraculously they hired me again after that.
That's great. I mean, not great that the photos were not up to your standards, but I'm glad that they kept hiring you. Okay, so, and this last one, just beautiful.
Thank you. So this is for a personal project that Jolie at the New York Times ended up publishing. I've pitched and published and written a few things with the Times over the years, but I've never done anything as personal as this. And I think I had unintentionally always picked personal projects that weren't too close to home. And then I realized that I needed to find a way to be vulnerable with my work too, if I wanted to actually put out anything of substance. So this project was like my first step towards that. It's very personal. The essay is about me growing up watching, Hollywood movies and loving them, and then realizing now as an adult that all of the characters that I related to were all, white characters. Like none of them had any real fleshed out Asian character. And this project was just me trying to kind of, reimagine them.
That's interesting. And so you said you wrote something for these before. So was it like a whole article that you wrote?
Yeah, there's like a personal essay that got published along with the images. And it's kind of cool how they presented it, because on the website, like it shows you the still of the actual Hollywood film still, and then when you scroll it kind of transforms into my image, and it's just really cool experience to see that.
Was there something about having that pitch accepted that was a confirmation maybe of your impulse to try and make things more personal and invest a little bit more of yourself into the work that you're presenting to editors?
For sure. This was like the first thing that was my personal project that I actually had options on where to publish it with, as opposed to before where, I would try with one place and then see if that they like it or not, and then try with another place. But with this one, I had like standing offers from other editors. It's just that because I had worked so much with Jolie, and I knew kind of like what the vertical was capable of, like the way they presented these stories. I was just really excited to see it there, and I wanted to work with her on this.
Cool. Thanks, Rosette.
Thank you.
Kayla, you're up. Hi.
Hello, how's it going?
So yeah, could you tell us a little bit about where you are and where you're from?
Well, my name's Kayla Reefer. I'm from Los Angeles, Greater Los Angeles. I'm currently based in LA as well. And yeah, I'm a photographer, dabble in a bit of cinematography. I'm an entrepreneur. I do a lot of things. I struggle a little too much, but yeah.
That's one of the great things about reading the profile that was written about you, is there's a great description of all the different things you're up to. It sounds like a lot. You must be very busy.
Yeah.
All right. So why don't you tell us a bit about this first photo?
Yeah. So this first photo is from my personal family series, Identidad, Identity. It's a personal reflection of, my family and myself, like our Afro-Panamanian descendants, and specifically like being Black and Latinx in Panama as well. There's not a lot of, I haven't seen a lot of images, like per doing my own research on like Afro-Panamanians and Black Panamanians. Like whenever I would look up images, we just weren't present. Mm-hmm. And the ones that I did find, there was just this typical stereotypical representation of like they were in the jungle, or they were kind of like fishing, or they were edited in the way to like where their skin was like harsh and kind of like grainy or something. There wasn't anything that was the perfect mix or balance of raw, but also still beautiful. And so I thought the best way to approach that and go about that is starting with my own family. So these are my cousins, and she's like holding her little brother, and this is like photographed at a park that's right behind our family house. My family has been there, geez, for like at least 50 years or something. Like we call it the big house because everyone goes there. I stay there whenever I visit Panama, and so we were just walking around and we went to this park, and that was like the first signature image of the series, is just me photographing them.
Mm-hmm. And was there, I don't know, why was it a sort of an important step for you to start photographing your family in this way?
Yes, because before this, I didn't really do any like personal work or have like a personal body or series of work. I'm very protective of my family. I'm also pretty private. Like I used to share a lot more before, like on social media and just things in general, but I've like kind of like honed in on that, specifically relating to my family. So I don't really like show too much. So this was like my way of opening up a little bit and sharing a bit of myself with the world, but also looking inward and really asking myself what it means to be Afro-Panamanian and how I can sort of like skew or make a better representation of what that looks like.
Great.
And then this image I chose, it's because it was my first assignment with, or my second assignment with the New York Times, but my first assignment as like a photojournalist, I would say. Because the first assignment I had was kind of a more on the celebrity things. It was like a portrait of like a Hollywood producer. But for this particular assignment, when Morgan reached out to me, this was like my first chance of like getting to know like a complete stranger and photographing him in the way that was true and intimate, because this was a story on Anthony Weber, who unfortunately he was killed by LAPD. He was 16 years old. And so my assignment was to go and visit and meet his family and photograph his personal belongings and his surviving family and the things that were just like left behind from his void. And this is Anthony's mother, like right outside of their house. And I remember like feeling incredibly nervous and a little scared about this particular assignment because of the magnitude of its importance and like the weight of it all. Because I remember texting a friend of mine and being like, this is like a pretty big deal. This is their son. Like they just lost their child. And I have to go in and photograph his family and make it come across as real and as raw as possible. And yeah, that was a major moment for me. We like handed that responsibility, and the responsibility of like care and approaching everything with this sense of humility and humanity for that. So.
Wow. Were you able to talk with the editor at all about that, or?
Yeah, so I'm actually still surprised. I don't know how Morgan came across my work. I'm glad that she did, but yeah, she definitely like briefed me on what I was walking into, who I was going to meet, more or less how I should go about things. But at the same time, she gave me like a lot of free reign. Like there was no specific requirements. I don't think there was any like reference images. She was just like, I love the work that you have this far and it feels, natural and authentic. So she kind of wanted me to just go into this in that same way. So I actually did both digital and film for this, but I submitted both, but I think they went with the film ones because they felt a little bit more like pure in a sense. Because I definitely took my time with the film, like setting up the shot and like breathing through this in the process and making sure that everyone in front of the camera was also comfortable. But yeah.
Interesting. All right, thank you.
This one was also for the New York Times, I believe also through Morgan as well. This was like my first international, again, photojournalistic assignment. I met with the writer in San Diego and we both drove across the border to Tijuana. And the person here is Jade Quintanilla. She's a trans woman that had made it to the border and was going to seek asylum for the US because she was persecuted in her home country. And then she's at an LGBTQ center in Tijuana. I believe it's Jardín de las Mariposas, it's Garden of the Butterflies. And she was there seeking refuge. And so I was assigned to go down to Tijuana and photograph her and any other immigrants that are also fleeing their home situations, and also the shelter in the center as well. So I think that was a key point for me, because again, it was a great responsibility to be photographing someone that's essentially, it's not safe for them to be photographed. Like they're fleeing their country, and it's a danger for them to just even exist. And so that I felt the great weight and responsibility of that, and it was a turning point for me as well. And I was happy that how they like trusted me and felt comfortable with me photographing her in this way.
Did you indicate to the editor, or do you feel like you talked to the editor about kind of what your interests were as a photographer that led to this assignment, or is it a situation where you just have a good relationship with someone and they think of you for things that make sense for you? Because I know it can kind of be, it can go both ways.
For this particular, for these assignments, it was just like a natural, like we just have a good relationship. And I think Morgan naturally knows like what I'm interested in and what fits with my work. And so she assigns it that way.
Yeah. Okay.
And for this one, was also for the New York Times. This one was assigned to me by Jolie Rubin. This one was a big moment because it was like my first like major celebrity portrait. And it was like of Michael B. Jordan, of all people. I like remember getting the email and I felt like the earth had cracked because I wasn't sure what was happening. But it was definitely one of those things where I think like how other photographers mentioned, it was like a on the fly, like you got to figure things out quick and fast, because I feel like I had like a couple of days to kind of configure things and get an assistant, but like the day of the shoot, like this is actually like in his hotel room, because he was hosting an award show in like the lobby area. I forgot the award show specifically, but he was like the main host. And they were like, yeah, so he's doing an interview downstairs and you guys can set up in here. And we had to like move chairs around and like tables and stuff and set up the backdrop. And I brought lights and the C-stands and all this stuff. And I think they were generous with their time. I think they gave us a total of like, did they give us like 45 minutes, 30 minutes? But we wrapped it up in like 30, and like I think actual shoot time was like 20 minutes because I don't want to take up too much of his time anyway. So this was one of the first setups, was like in the actual hotel room. He's just sitting, I believe, on an Apple box. And this is like the black and white version, but I had some like color gel set up. So there's like a nice like orange and red kind of like glow going on. And then we also did some shots on the balcony as well.
How did you figure out how to like basically produce a celebrity shoot like this if you hadn't done one before?
Ooh, I don't even know if I could take responsibility for that. I think it was one of the things, again, like the editor just came across my work and I guess took a chance on assigning this to me. And I feel like I reached out the previous year. I can't exactly remember, but I was definitely surprised that this was like out of the blue. And I definitely didn't expect it to be someone of that, magnitude already as like a first celebrity shoot. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. And the second Nipsey Hussle photo of the presentation.
And then I ended it with this one, and I included it because it's as a personal milestone, because it was I feel like it was a manifestation for me, because I remember specifically writing down. I have these like personal journals or the day planners where you can like write your goals, and I remember specifically writing Nipsey Hussle for a few different publications, because I tried to pitch a story on him and his journey to the California Sunday, to Vice, and I believe another publication. And then a few months later, I don't even know what compelled me. I randomly wrote in like another personal notebook, like Nipsey Hussle for the Fader, which is what this ended up being for. And it was a very spur of the moment shoot as well. The writer and also editor that was at the Fader at the time reached out to me, I think the morning of, like early morning. And yeah, it was, unfortunately the weather wasn't that great in LA at the time. It was like really rainy and gloomy outside. So I had to meet him at his store, the Marathon Clothing Store. And we ended up just making this image inside of the store. And then there's the Hallmark Crenshaw sign and logo that's right behind him. And yeah, it was a major moment for me, because like I had manifested that, but it was also like, given what happened, his passing literally like 2 months later, that was also like a big, like, I feel like it was a great, I don't know if you heard that, but they're turning up outside.
That's all right.
But yeah, I think I was one of the last people to photograph him before his passing.
Wow.
Because I know they did the GQ shoot with him and Lauren London, and that came out after this one, but they had photographed that, I think the weekend before I had photographed him. And then, yeah, he passed away, and I remember feeling very, very strongly, and like, it was very eerie, but also just, yeah, overwhelming feeling.
All right. Thank you so much. Raina, hi. Now for something different.
Yeah. Connor knows.
Which is great. So thanks, Raina. Yeah, tell the folks a little bit about you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I feel like maybe I'm crashing a party a little bit. I'm Raina Young. I'm a artist and educator based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I moved here about 2 years ago with my husband, and happy to be here. I'm from Missouri, so I'm like sort of in the same pocket that I'm from. Although I did go to undergrad in Portland, Oregon, so I got out of the Midwest for a second, and then headed right back for grad school at the University of Nebraska. So I know all of this sounds very exciting to be honest.
No, it is. It's great to have someone who has a completely different path involved,
Sure.
Okay, so tell us about this image and why you chose it.
Yeah, I chose, I actually chose all personal work for sharing today. And that's what I actually submitted after being nominated for this. And it's such an honor to be recognized for those images. And I started with this one because it sort of marks when I took myself sort of seriously for the first time as a photographer, as an artist. I started undergrad kind of late. Traditionally, I was 24 years old, and then took a year off after and went right into grad school. So I'm starting grad school, in my early 30s at that point, and it wasn't until then that I really thought, like, this is a viable future. And I did apply to grad school, and I was accepted. And I think reality didn't hit like what I sort of signed up for or committed to until then. I think we often make choices thinking it's sort of the next step and not always understanding why or substantiating why it is for us. And I had to reckon with that quickly. And I began making personal work with my former partner in our home at the time. And I was experiencing a lot of I don't know, domestic uncertainty, and perhaps the next image will tell us why a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so before we move on, though, I just want to, you mentioned thinking about yourself, like, kind of thinking about yourself as an artist. Was that a kind of an important change in mindset you feel like in your career?
Yeah, I definitely took note of the fact that I made images as early as I could remember. I was that kid that plastered their, disposable, camera prints all over their bedroom. And I was sort of documenting everything. I think it was a way for me to cope with a lot of things from childhood and things that we experience. And again, I started school late, and this idea to pick a career path, or what I thought I was drawn to at the time, was architecture, and the market was terrible then. And we're talking like 2008, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a crazy time, and it didn't seem very viable that I would have a career path in that, although I was like on the track to. And I started taking photography classes formally in school in my undergrad, and I happened to work with these two amazing women at Portland State University who sort of were on both sides of like the perceived career paths that I thought I could have, which would be becoming an educator and sort of staying a perpetual student, staying in school forever, or doing more of a commercial sort of client-based, practice. Another professor of mine had representation for that sort of mission, and so I got to see both sides, and so that's when I was like, there's more to this than I realized, and sort of snuck in the back door of a BFA program, it felt like, and then packaged myself that next year for grad school, and chose a school really specifically in a landscape that I wanted to work in, but also that I thought I had a realistic shot of getting in because I didn't have a strong, maybe a more traditional strong portfolio. Anyway, got in the back door there too, I feel. So
that's great.
Yeah. Okay,
so tell us about this image.
Yeah, so this stems from the same body of work. It's called The Rugs Topography, and it was wound up being my thesis work. And it's always so interesting talking about this idea of like your grad school work, and sometimes it feels like there's like a negative connotation there. But I was a grad student in my 30s, so I'm like, this is like my life, man. This is like what I'm sort of, making images of here, and it's pretty serious to me. And so this was the last portrait I made of my partner. And so the body of work was made over 2 years, roughly. And it was the last year of our relationship and the year following it. And we actually stayed in the same home upon separation. And we separated because in the last year of our relationship, in the 6th year, my former partner unveiled that they were experiencing and had been experiencing and enduring gender dysphoria. They're pretty much as long as I could remember. And they were sort of performing a role in many roles in their life that didn't align with how they actually felt about themselves or presented themselves in a way that that they wanted to moving forward. And being so close to them, to me, the priority to us, the priority was salvaging like with the bond that we had and not really worrying about like the romantic platonic like labels, and just like being family to each other and working together. And this was a way for us to talk about it for the first time in a lot of ways. There was conversations happening, but as we know, even in 5 years from when these were starting to be made, the language has developed so much, and like we're a bit more comfortable talking about what it means, what transgender experience like looks like, feels like, and how to center that in this field especially. And that was all really new to us and sort of private. Yeah, so a lot more to that, obviously, but this was sort of the last image I made in the project. When they started hormone replacement therapy is when I said, my perspective of this as a partner is going to close at this moment when they're going to sort of, when we're sort of going to just split off and do our own thing. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, and it's a lovely book that you made out of the work as well.
Thanks.
Okay, this is a little bit of a different. Why did you choose to include this image?
Yeah, taking a turn here. I wrapped up that project, and it coincides with this sort of mile marker of earning an MFA, and then it's like, what do I do now? I met my husband now, but I met him in grad school, and he was a year behind me, so I wanted to stick around. Where we were living, and wait on him to graduate, and so we can move on with our lives. And I was thinking about this idea of, where I was from, and I wasn't raised by my mother. I was raised by a single father, and my mother was from Nebraska. It was a big reason why I chose to go there for grad school. I thought I was going to make work about my mom and all of this. I had big plans, and it went a different way. But I started to think about that more. And I also really enjoy making other types of images. So, when we talk about working under pressure, making fast decisions, maybe tornadoes are my celebrities.
Right.
I'm like, I have to react quickly also, but in a very different context. But I'm thinking about how to incorporate at this point landscapes and sort of picturing like where I'm from beyond the confines of like my home, the walls of my home, and what that looks like in a body of work now for me. Yeah.
All right.
Also trying to show a little style, I guess, too. Some other sort of. I was well aware that. I wanted to do some sort of client work. I wanted to work for publications also, and my main goal was to be an educator, and I'm lucky to do that. But I also knew that like I wanted to do these other things too, and I said, well, if I get out there and start making these pictures and then put them on my Blink profile, then maybe I'll get noticed. And I think it worked a couple times.
Did it? Yeah, I was going to ask, have you taken your? I mean, it must be sort of an odd thing to take very personal work a lot of times that you're making in a fine art context and then pitch that to editors. How have you gone about that?
I will admit that I haven't done a lot of pitching, and that's why I feel a little strange among so much company that has maybe. But I think that a lot of the work I've gotten has been regionally based. Like not a lot of us live in Fayetteville, Arkansas, so I'm not really competing with many photographers out here, and besides my husband, who's also a photographer.
Right.
But that has a lot to do with it too. I think is like, we're sort of positioned nicely where if a story comes up here, there's only so many people to call. So.
Right. Okay, and how about this one?
Yeah, so I wanted to transition into making other work, obviously, and as an educator, it's like part of the expectation of my role is research. It's making work, exhibiting work, all of these things, and where do I go after making such a sort of intimate body of work with a partner? And that was arguably the first body of work I'd ever made photographically. So that was, what do other bodies of work of mine look like? And, I was quick to sort of turn the lens on my former partner. And what does it look like to turn the lens more on myself in a literal way and sort of share, experiences with an audience, implicating myself more physically or more directly, I suppose. And that has a lot to do with looking at my matrilineal line and my mother who didn't raise me and all of these things. And so I think I chose this to show that like I definitely have a style that I work in, and it's quiet and sort of dark and even melancholic I can recognize. And I think that's something of mine that will continue no matter if I incorporate other types of images, I suppose.
Yeah, great. This one's really interesting. Yeah, tell us about this.
Yeah, final picture. Yeah, I've been unpacking like a lot of familial narratives that I sort of grew up hearing, and again, I'm trying to access this idea of knowing a parent that I didn't experience growing up, and also trying to find out like maybe what has happened or what had happened in her life that maybe directed some of the choices that made her not quite ready to be a mother. And appropriating and mining and probing her archive is part of that process for me. And so I've been also figuring out ways to sort of intervene on images that she owned, that I inherited, to articulate those sort of feelings and narratives differently than I had been working. I try to challenge like my own personal trends. I still feel really new to photography in a lot of ways, but part of working through that, I think, is working and sort of giving yourself permission to break rules that maybe you thought you couldn't, or to just sort of expand on those methods a little bit more. Yeah,
that's great. Well, thanks. And actually, I'm going to just we're going to take some questions now, and we are going to run a little bit over here. So folks, if you want to, type in some questions into the chat, please do. We're going to take as many as we can over the next few minutes. But I'm just going to come right back to you, Raina. And Marion Thomas has a question here, just about exhibiting, like, to get your work out there. Have you tried exhibiting in local galleries? And I think maybe what she's getting at is, how do you figure out who to approach when you're looking for exhibitions? Is it good to kind of start locally? Do you just call the MoMA?
Just call them up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to just, I have my eyes like on the field. Like I try to, and when I say that, I mean, even that is pretty narrow. Like the sort of bubble I feel like I exist in is like the academic fine art photography realm. And so it is a sort of like insular place, but within that, there are definitely things I've engaged in that I think have helped me sort of see like, what the possibilities are, and access to those possibilities and understanding them is really important to me. Because you don't know what your career can look like without those examples. And so I was, I've been heavily involved in the Society for Photographic Education for several years now. And so starting off as a student, receiving portfolio reviews, and now, engaging with them as an educator, applying to like all the small and large, online publications that, offer a platform for artists to showcase their work. I'm trying, I tried for a long time just to like put images out there, put myself out there as much as possible, and while also trying to protect certain things and not being too eager. There's definitely edits of images of mine, older images, where I'm like, oh gosh, like that's on the internet forever. And it's really disappointing to me. Because maybe I changed it, the edit of it like a year later, and it's like, whatever, look at the chime stamp, everyone. But it's, just sort of like keeping your eye on the artists that you're sort of attracted to, like their work and what steps they're taking. And I've looked at a lot of CVs in my day, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's a great trick.
Yeah.
So there's a question here, and we're going to switch a little bit more or back to editorial conversation. Mariella Murdocco, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but I think this is a really good question. And it's, when you're working for publications, it's a contract question. This is a kind of a difficult one. A lot of times the contract that a publication is giving to you, you're signing over rights or certain rights. And a lot of times, people are going for ownership of your photos when you're working editorially. Especially as a young photographer, I feel like you can kind of get some bad contracts if you're not careful. So I'm curious, if there's a way to negotiate. Do you guys feel like you can negotiate contracts with publications? Those of you who shoot editorial, and I don't know, maybe Miran, if you want to step in first. Yeah, I saw you preparing. Yeah.
No, I think that everyone, no matter where in their career they are, should know that no one's going to take it personal if you push on a contract. That's not the point of that relationship. You should not. And if someone was to get mad at you for pushing on them, then maybe that's not someone you necessarily want to be working with. Like it's ultimately the legal department that's asking the creative team to implement these things. So a lot of times, in my experience as well, like photo editors will be on your side essentially. They might not necessarily like word it that way when they send it over to you, but I just think that even if, and some people can't budge, right? Like obviously there's certain publications or entities that have hard lines, but I think the very first point to make is like, no matter what, push. Like you should always feel comfortable. And if they can budge, they're gonna budge. And if they can't, they'll let you know, right? So it's like it's really important to not think you'll lose work over pushing on a contract. I personally have not had an instance, and this is not necessarily even where I'm at now, but also earlier in my career, after I gained that confidence and was told this by other photographers, I've never lost work because I pushed on a contract, right? Like I might have decided to pull away, like I didn't think it was worth it, or I thought that wasn't something I felt comfortable with, but no one's ever been like, I can't believe this photographer would be willing to fight me on this. Give them the axe, all right? Like I don't know, because I did it too, right? We all did it. I think early on in our career, we were scared of stepping on toes, but I think such an important lesson is to know that legal department is not creative department, and typically not always, but they're going to be like on your side. Like they were like, oh, I get it. Let me go check, right? Like you want to at least get the combo there. So I'm like really, because I have a lot of like assistants who I know that are trying to get into shooting now, and like younger photographers that have definitely asked this question. And you just like see yourself in it, And I think it's definitely something I'm passionate about. Always push.
Good. Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. Rosette, there were a couple of questions because you mentioned your story about going to New York to show your book. And so I just want to everyone who's asking this question, just to make it clear that book in this context, even though Rosette actually did, it sounds like make a book. It's shorthand for your portfolio, so it can take a lot of different forms. I know some people show physical portfolios still, some people are on a iPad, but it's essentially just talking about portfolio. But there's a sort of a follow-up second part to this question from Jay Milena, and it's how do you submit one to editors? Like, what is your process for submitting your work to editors?
So basically now it's just email. I don't even do printed mail. I used to a long time ago, but I found that it's not that more effective than emails. I never ever call because people have always mentioned how much they hated getting cold phone calls, so I just would never even attempt it. But really, all the meetings that I've gotten have been because of emails. So just email as much as you can and I always put photos in the email rather than making them click a bunch of links, because if they can't see anything, then they're really busy. So you want to just show them something right away.
Right. And a little bit of a follow on to that question, and Kayla, maybe we can hear from you on this, is because I think it was interesting, you were talking about sort of manifesting the shoot with the fader and Nipsey Hussle. How do you research who you want to reach out to, and contact info, and kind of how to find the people that you want to work for and are pitching to?
For me personally, like I was blessed with like a very strong community of like fellow photographers. So the first thing I do is like I reach out to them to see if they've already shot with that publication, and if they have like a mutual contact that I can get in touch with. But I'm also like, even though I'm not so much of an advocate for social media, it does have its pros in terms of finding editors on there. Like pretty much any publication you can think of, like the editor's going to be on Instagram at the very least. And you can like, also depending on the photographers that you're following, 9 times out of 10, they'll tag the editor that gave them the assignment. So you can follow up with that editor in that way. That's how I usually do it. And I'm also very purposeful with the assignments that I get when I post, that I make sure I tag whoever it is that hired me, so that other people can see and they can follow up as well.
That's great.
So it's just a mixture of like community and also just, social media, just kind of being like savvy in that way, and seeing who's doing the hiring, and how you can get in contact with them directly.
So this brings up an interesting question, and that I had, and then also Veronica Tatum, who's watching, who's a student at New York Institute of Photography, was asking about this as well. And I think it comes down, it's sort of a broad question that she's asking. You know, she's young. She's like, how do you get noticed? And so I want to build on that a little bit and ask, you know, posting on social media and being involved on social media is great. How do you balance that with like reaching out and sending like personal communications to people too to get them to notice you? Like, how do you get noticed as a young person? Is it about doing both really well, or do you feel like one is stronger than the other, just in terms of like posting your images or actually being proactive and trying to approach people?
I think it's a mixture of both. I definitely remember doing a ton of cold emails, especially at the beginning, just like taking the risk. And as Rosette said, like making sure there's an actual image within the email. I did like GIFs of like, because the way I have my website set up is like a hover. So you hover over one thing and the image pops up. So I thought of that as like a way to like, maybe this will be interesting in terms of like getting their attention. So I attached a GIF in there and like sent the cold email. But it's definitely like, and being purposeful in that email and but also to the point, because as Rosette also mentioned, they're very busy. So they get hundreds of, if not thousands of emails from photographers all the time. So it's just about making sure that you get your message across and that you're direct in what you would like to shoot. And again, following that up with seeing, you know, who's on social media and if you're comfortable like following them and keeping in touch in that way too. So it's a mixture of both things. And I've also noticed from other photographers, doing your own like personal work also helps. Like having your things that you're personally passionate about, your own series, like editors pay attention to that too. And sometimes even though you don't have any professional photojournalistic work, they'll look at your personal series and hire you off of that.
Yeah, to add to that too, I think when you're first starting out, you're not necessarily going to be competing with this like high production. I mean, maybe even if you have a high stylized look, you might not necessarily have the stylist that the 10-year in pro hat, you know, like there's all these resources that are going against you. So I think that something that young photographers or anyone who's doesn't even have to be age thing, just anyone who's trying to get into that realm that doesn't necessarily have published work, I think your biggest strength is kind of it's ultimately going to be your personality and being able to kind of, whether that be in the email saying like, oh, I'm actually really into this kind of work. I've been exploring these ideas, like just double down on the fact that you have things you care about. And that's like what you've been thinking about. Cause I think instead of trying to compete with like, look how great this is, it's more like, hey, I may not have that much experience with you, but I have a lot of things I want to talk about or think about or explore. And I hope that we could, you know, do that together on a project. And I think that people will remember you in like that personal way more than like, just like how they see so much work, right? So it's like, I think it's important just to register people on a personal level if possible.
That's great. Raina, Ben, maybe we'll just end on you because I'd love to hear your perspective on this from a fine art approach. How do you get people to notice you? You mentioned portfolio reviews earlier. Are there other things that you feel like are particularly important?
Yeah, definitely the portfolio reviews, which, you know, it's complicated as someone that was like, has been pretty poor for a long time. You know, it's a pretty privileged like thing to even engage in, to be able to do a lot of these things. And a lot of these things become like prerequisites to achieve the next level. You know what I mean? And like I've applied to New York Portfolio Review, I think 4 times and didn't get in. You know what I mean? It's like, so it's like a weird thing where there are things that you sort of gain access to and other things you don't, and you don't know why. Like, I mean, I think right now is a good example for me feeling that way. I'm like, where do I fit into all this? But, you know, I think if I'm learning anything, it's that versatility is just really important in what we do, and or being really authoritative about what you do, what you don't do. You know, I kind of thought I had to be like super available for everything and again put my work out and just sort of flood, like saturate like whatever platform I had with it at first. And I'm starting to realize that like it's really more important just to understand like why you think your work fits in a certain context and why it doesn't. And and to also try things to figure that out. But you know, most of the times I've been approached have been based on the style of my personal work and how that would translate or help illustrate like essays or things like that. So it's, you know, we all have a thing, and you know, and editors are looking for that fit, that thing that'll help translate. And I'm happy to have like a little piece of it somewhere, you know.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, we've run over a little bit. Thanks everyone for asking really intelligent questions. I appreciate it. And thanks to the four of you for agreeing to share some photos and some knowledge with us. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you so
you.
much.